when there's a stream of thought that goes through, sometimes there's so many things to talk about, and I had to kind of break this down through several topics. But I wanted to share with you guys this one thing this thing I do this quite often, and you've probably seen from the title, to give a fuck and then not give a fuck. And what I mean by this is not because you don't care or that you're apathetic or that you are completely like, what do you call this? I guess consumed by the emotions. Neither. But the point is more like to repurpose that emotion of caring about something that matters to you, but at the same time letting go, and then eventually letting go of things that don't matter to you, meaning like something that resonate with you. It's not about apathy or the opposite of that. It's not about opposites either. It's not about any of those things. I've learned to do this where it's like, because before I would just be completely consumed by the emotion, and I would just get into it. It was very toxic, and it was just like, it's not good, right? So the point about this whole thing is to kind of use the darkness within to help you process things. So really what it is you're owning back your emotions and your power. Because I'll give you an example. When I remember when I was in my 20s, I would, even now, to some degree, I get kind of like irked, or rather, that's just putting it lightly. I would get highly disturbed by people's lack of empathy. And not because they lack empathy, it's just they don't know how to work with empathy. That's because of, past lives. They don't have that in their bloods. It's not in their DNA or whatever it is. It's not something they grew up with. They were just given the answers all the time. They were just told what to do. So they're kind of basically running like, what people have referred to as mindless automatons, right? But really that's not true, right? It's just that people don't know how to deal with those emotions. So really going into the emotion itself and kind of using the extremes of those emotions. Because for me, I would not much anymore, but I would still feel the extremes of the emotions. It'd be like really intense, it's exaggerated, and then I hear these thoughts that come through my head, and then I like kind of just let it flow, because it's practice. Especially when there's invalidation. What I mean by invalidation is not just invalidation itself, but like this feeling of like, it's not that people invalidate me, but it's like when I get when I get advice and I'm not asking for it, and what I really want is just for them to just sit there, okay, and then just really just be present, really be present. But most people are still learning that today, or at least a lot of people are learning that today, and a lot of the other people are not yet there yet, and they're not there yet. So but anyways, the key is it feels like someone is telling me how to feel. That's one of the big ones. That's literally like one of the big ones. I would say probably be the biggest one. When someone tells you how to feel. I mean, it's one thing to give advice. It's another thing to say, "Oh, you shouldn't feel that way. Are you feeling okay?" It's almost like they're doing this unconsciously when they're trying to give you advice, because they can't handle how you feel, how dark you feel, especially when you start to get really dark and you start to feel like you want to destroy the fucking universe, but which is, of course, it's an extreme, right? But there is that feeling. But people don't want to hear that because they can't handle the darkness. They can't handle the ability to, or the potential to process it inwards, because they haven't done the work themselves. And it's, so something like, this is where it gets a little graphic, okay? I'm not trying to spread negativity here, but I'm just letting you know, okay, forewarning, that it's sort of like when I actually took notes here, and I'm better at writing things down in more profound detail. Like when someone tells me how to feel, and it feels like it's controlling, right? It feels like it's this whole like subjugation, and it's like oppression, it's all that energy. I feel like someone might as well like slit my throat wide open as the blood pours out, and you know they're drinking all the blood, and they're lapping it up and emptying out what feels like my soul. And then it gets like, I wrote down here, while it's getting throat thrusted with such judgment and negativity, and someone's penis is ramming down your throat as this where the slit was made. Graphic, yes, but that's an example of how exaggerated it feels. But that exaggeration is not, it's not for, it has a reason for it. There's a reason behind it. For me, the reason that happens, I feel, is because I want them to stop. I think that's the reason for exaggeration. Exaggeration is, the reason we exaggerate is because we want to expand the borders. We want to go like, get away. Right? But it's a form of resistance. I think in my case, exaggeration is a form of resistance to people's opinions and their well-intentedness, like their well-intentions, they're well-intended, because they mean well. So, but sometimes what I prefer is for people to empathize, because a lot of people are still quick to react, so one of the ways I do it is like, I just now sit and I say, okay, I just observe. This is where the power of silence comes in. The power that stems from, I had to write it down here. So the power that stems from that sort of void, that's void energy. It's like the darkness, the void, because it's internal processing. It's death and it's rebirth. That's that darkness, right? That's where it happens. Right? The process of internalizing and processing. Now, when I see this in the video, first of all, it may not make sense to some people because they don't know what it's like. I can tell you right now that I have had to learn how to deal with the darkness itself, and I don't know, I guess it feels like I can just deal with it. And this is where I've had to create a lot of, I made posts on this before, where I've created a lot of like thick ass fatherfucking boundaries. And I don't want to see I don't want to use them, because this time I just want to use the fatherfucking, because it's sexier. Right? The fatherfucking energies. Okay? Like the whole like thick ass, like we're talking like galactic ass, thick ass boundaries. And we're not talking boundaries in the sense that it's like actual boundaries, but in a way, yes, in that case. And people start to get that when they start to push buttons. I'm not saying that they do this on purpose either. Some people just have this unconscious drive or this unconsciousness to kind of push what they want because they're afraid. And same thing for me, because I understand what that's like, because it's like, I don't want it this way because I don't feel safe, I don't feel validated, I don't feel safe, I don't feel accepted, I don't feel like I belong. So separation leads to separation. Hurt people, whether it's consciously or unconsciously. Mostly it's unconscious, right? So that's where it is. So when it comes to this whole thing about not giving a fuck, it's more like, or giving a fuck, not giving a fuck, it's more like trying to use the processing of like, okay, I'm going to acknowledge these emotions, and then I work through it. But that's where the whole silence things comes in, right? Sometimes people who are silent are not necessarily like passive in a way. People believe that passiveness is just like, oh, doing nothing. That's not how I see it, at least. To me, there's a reason some people are quiet, because they're processing it. Usually the quiet ones, you've heard this before, maybe for some of you who haven't, people who are quiet, you have to watch out for those. Because otherwise, next thing you know, you're basically cutting your head off, verbally. But you don't want it to go beyond that, right? So, the key to all this is like when it comes to owning back your power, you cannot control what other people do. But it is this process of like, really the processing. But that's just putting it lightly. What it is kind of like there's no word to describe the processing through that darkness, because there's so much intense emotion that it's just like, there's nothing else to do. Talking will not help. Explaining to other people will not work. Right? But yeah, so for me, it's tied a lot to like hubris and pride and, feeling like I'm being attacked. There's a victim mode, goes into that one, those kind of things. But I'm starting to learn more and more, and continuously, that you can't change what other people say or do. You can, however, process the energy yourself and really work through it and surrender. That's why I've said in other videos, like, you surrender. This is what I meant by surrender. The power is not mine to have. It was never mine to have. Meaning like this human self. The power is a co-created thing. So if I allow, because we live in this limited body form, right? So what happens is it's limited. So you're not going to be able to hold in true power itself. We look for power, we seek power because we don't have it. It comes from a place of lack. Because we believe it's like, I don't have it. But we do have it, actually. It's just a matter of learning how to do that. So for me, the way I've learned it is I can't really put it in words, so I can't really share with you guys like what is the actual the hands-on process. I don't know. I don't know the hands-on process. But the emotions will tell you how to do it if we listen to the emotions. When I say listen, I mean don't succumb to the emotions. Don't be a slave to the emotions. They're not there to enslave you. The emotions are there to help you realize, what is it that you want? 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 When I say want, I mean not out of lack. A want that is desired to be. Like simple things like, I saw this video. It was a reminder of like what I tend to do when it comes to, let's say, for example, like I personally don't like the idea of having to drive in North America, because once you would need a car, but it feels like a need. You see what I mean? It's like, it's an obligation. But the reason I don't like it is because when you drive, it's like, first of all, you buy the car, and it's not even like, it's like a means to an end, right? It's like, okay, there's the car and it gets you from A to B. But I never understood why it had to be so complicated that they had to make all this stuff, like the evolution of car production, right? Production of cars. It lost its way. It was like, a vehicle is only supposed to get you from A to point B. But people, that's the ego thing, right? When it's ego driven, it's more like, I have to get you there faster. I have to get you there more comfortably. It's almost like this complaint after complaint after complaint. It's like complete dissatisfaction. It's complete dissatisfaction again and again and again and again. And it's like, oh, it's not enough money. Oh, then there's a rationalization of the ego that's saying, I have to make it more expensive because I'm not worth it. But it comes from this place of, it's kind of like, you can sense it. I don't know if people sense that, but for me, I'm just like, this absurdity of like the way cars have been. Like, why couldn't we just have simple cars where it's not like $10 million fucking dollars? Just for what reason? Why does it have to be so inaccessible? It's not because it's the price and the value. The value can be there. It's not about the value. It's more like, how do you make it? How is it humanitarian? How is it that people can go from this place to this place? And yes, it's easier, it's nice, it's great, but to what degree do we have to make it so accessible? Like, it's extreme accessibility, or extreme inaccessibility, right? It's like, and then there's ads about it, and it's like, oh, so it's this sort of conditioning that it's like, oh, you have to get this, and you have to work through this, and you have to save up for this. For what reason? For what purpose? For what meaning? You get a car, you buy a car, it costs like, maybe $20,000. Okay, and then what? You buy insurance, and then what? The insurance is for what? Why do you get insurance? Because I want to feel safe. And why do you want to feel safe? Why do you sell insurance? Because you want people to feel that they're safe, assuming that they're not going to die. And why? So you see what I mean? It's all fear-based, 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 fear-based. All of it. At least most of it. Right? Instead of making it simple and going from A to B, but at the same time, this whole collective energy, this whole thing where it's like, the reason we have accidents in the first place is, why do we have accidents? What causes an what are several things that cause accident? If you look at it, you analyze it, and you look what causes accidents. Because they were in focus, they were in a hurry. Again, fear-based. Because they weren't conscious, they weren't present. They weren't enjoying the journey. They were just focused on from A to B. Literally A and B, not even two, the process of two. They're not even, it's not about the journey anymore. It's about from A and then B. Nothing in between. What part of that is logical? What part of that makes sense? How do you... right? But, for it, at least in the past, about 20 years ago, when I would talk about something like this, people didn't understand what I was saying. It's, oh, because you need to get from A to... And then when you say something, it's almost like whoosh, over their head. It's over their heads. And this is like, you don't get the absurdity of having cars like today's cars. It's not about car itself. It's about today's, the way it is today. I mean, at least for the past 20, 30, 50 years. The absurdity behind all of it. Right? And then, like, you see what I mean? And another reason that was added to it for me was that during the pandemic, it's like, why you have a car is because you want to get away from people. You don't want to catch the virus. You want to stay in the car. If you have to sleep in the car, what if you lost your home? What if you don't have a home? So you have a car. So it's a security backup thing, because that's out of fear. Because you see what I mean? It's like fear on top of fear, 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 fear on top of fear. It's so fucking it's toxic. Okay, so, and this is where I'm using this whole thing where it's like, I'm giving a fuck about it, and I'm using the energy of intensity, and then at the same time, I'm processing it and saying, okay, I can't change that. But what I can do is do something else about that. I personally don't need to get a car. I don't need to, even the idea of like studying for a license, studying for a permit, the system they have here, placed here, even in Canada, it's like you have to replace it every 5 years. Why every 5 years? Because they don't trust. It comes back down to trust. They don't trust that you are the same person as you were 5 years ago. It's almost like we need to validate that you are the same person. Otherwise, you can't be the same person. The more unconscious part behind it is like, oh, because so that way you pay for it and we get money out of it. Right? It's like, what is the actual purpose behind that? Why is getting a license, first of all, that whole license thing, why are you getting to get a license when you just get to go from A to B? You don't have licenses for bikes, right? Why? Why do you have a license for cars? Because so they can track you in case you got into an accident, or that you were the cause of the accident. See, blame, victim, blame and victim, blame and victim, fear, more fear, more fear. You see that? You see that? Something as simple as that, right? So this is where the intensity comes in, where it's like, I don't need to exactly be intense, outright intense, and say whatever the fuck I want to say. It's not about that, because I don't want to spread any more of that negativity and that fear stuff, but use the negativity and repurpose it, and then towards something where it's not only healing, but it's so that it brings out purpose, and it also wakens people up, and it's just like, wake the fucking fuck up, right? It's like, why do we do that? Like, I wouldn't say wasted time. I mean, it's not a real waste, but it's like the intention behind getting a degree, for example. I have 2 degrees. It's like, why did I do that? But the actual thing is, the gift behind is, I did it because I enjoy languages. I got to know some people. Okay, I got some experience out of it. You know, time is an illusion. So those were not wasted years, but the intention behind it were just like, part of it was also prestige, by the way. So, but the point I'm going through this, I'm not trying to I don't want to digress too much. But the point is, like, really, right? You see that I'm reusing using the anger as an initiative, as an energy of assertiveness, or initiative to bring out to share with you my experiences, to share with you that it's like, okay, we need to really rethink and reprocess everything that we're going through. Okay? So, this is where, just a little side note, by the way, tied to the whole car thing, just like, this is why I want to get like a 4-wheel bike. That apparently there's those cars that they look like cars, but it's not a car. It's like a 4-wheel bike and runs on battery or something like that. Way better. Okay. Even if I'm just pedaling it. Do you remember Flintstones? For those when you were kids, you remember Flintstones? Like, they would walk. They would walk their cars. What's so bad about that? Meaning, what's so bad about like getting calluses on your feet? Because it's like fear, right? That's fear. The human thing is fear. It's a layer of fear over fear over fear that stems from this basic survival mechanism, which is, I don't want to die. So we equate pain also with, I don't want to die. Right? Pain equals death. Discomfort equals death. Change equals death. And but the thing about death is it's transition. But even if it's an actual death, we're afraid of dying because we've been conditioned for thousands of years. Right? And I think that's what's frustrating. I think that here, this frustrating thing behind it is that, why are we afraid of death? Why? Because we have this belief that we are separate. We have been separated from our power, our true power connection to Source. And I think so that's where the frustration lies. It's like, we roll our eyes and be like, why am I even afraid of death? Like, if I am God, if I am omnipotent, if I am part of that energy, I share that energy with what is, why is it so little? Why do I feel so? That's the other layer of the frustration, right? But instead of succumbing to the actual frustration, it's really transmuting. I think that's the key word I wanted to say here. Transmuting, processing, using the darkness, not just to process it, but to kind of give you this instinctive sort of like an intuitive gut feeling of like, I'm not going to sit around and play victim anymore. Right? I'm going to keep going. And then we're using everything else, all these dark energies, the pride, the jealousy, the rage, the wrath, the hatred, the resentment, the greed, all this, repurposing all that negative energy, the darkness energy, and transmuting it so that it's like, what is the gift behind that? How is it that it's part of Source energy? Because if you think about it, on a physical level, in a material level, physical level, earthly level, and there's rot. What is rot? Because usually we're afraid of rot, right? We're afraid of viruses, rot, decay. We don't like that smell because it's like, but there's a reaction to that smell, and why we don't like it, because we're afraid that it's a reminder of our own, what we call futility. Okay, it's a reminder of our own death. It's a reminder of an ending. But really, what it is a transition. But if you think about it, it's like form looks like it's changing because we can see it as like we have this thing where it's like If you think about it at the submolecular level, even beyond that, subatomic, what makes one thing, these little things, like say this little finger right here, if I cut this off, if I cut it off and I see little parts of it, and you're looking at the microscopic level, right? The things that make it up, and beyond the cells itself, deeper than the cell, the RNA, the DNA, you look at it, whatever it is, doesn't matter what, I'm just spotting out words because I'm not in science, okay? I'm not a biologist. I'm not into that stuff. I'm not any of that stuff. The point is that's not what matters. I go into the little details, like what is the those things, but what's behind it is really the intelligence, which is source energy, right? That creates that. If you cut off a finger, it bleeds, right? Eventually that bleeding is just a shock, right? You cut off the finger, okay? But then eventually it starts to coagulate, and the blood will start to heal that area. It'll start to, like, eventually the skin will follow. The tissues and the skin will follow. And then, next thing you know, it's like, oh, you just don't have a finger. Like, right? This whole thing, right? In our heads, in our minds, it's like, oh no, you lost a finger. Oh no, there's a separation. Oh no, it's lost. But it's not to say that we should cut off limbs from other people, or that we should cut off our own limbs, cause damage, all this stuff. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that sometimes some things happen that are results of some things that shouldn't have happened. Or something that may happen, but that also shouldn't have happened had we been present. Which means connecting to source again. So how this ties in with the whole, like, giving a fuck and not giving a fuck and giving a fuck and not giving a fuck, and that cycle, is that whole thing. For me, it feels like a strong, powerful processing process of repurposing the pain and all that stuff. That's why the Buddha said that, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. So how do we reutilize that stuff? How do we how do we transmute? How do we repurpose? How do we make use of the negative energies? So that's the whole key. I hope that kind of clarifies things, right? We look at the little things, if we look at it from its actual essence of things, essence itself. Form is just the visual identification and recognition that it's this form, but really it's not. You break it down, like you break out, like this, say for example, this flag right here, a piece of cloth, right? You break it down to little pieces. It'll just be little pieces. It'll just be like powder. Right? It'll just be powder. It's like this sort of molecular things, but our eyes don't recognize it. And that's a good thing. If we don't recognize it, that means it's mysterious. That means it's unknown. That means it has a potential to form again. Even if it doesn't form again, the point is not about form or not forming. The point is that there is that source energy, that formless energy, source energy, whatever you want to call it. It's there, and it's always there, and it's always forming. So, yeah, it's a kind of you can say it's like a food for thought. Okay, food for the soul. You can say food for soul kind of thing, right? Where it's like, oh, okay, so in this life I have this form. Or in this moment I have this form. Because when you were a baby, even looking at it when you were a baby, you look different from when you were a baby than what you are today. So naturally, you died many, many times just to get here. You see? So, anyways, at least that's for me, it's like an insight for me. Right? As I'm telling you this, it's also giving me insight. So, I hope that helps. Thank you so much for watching again. See you guys later.